Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take, a whole stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes, and we really try to pull out the absolute key insights just for you. Our mission today, it's really to help you get genuinely well informed and do it quickly but thoroughly on some pretty deep concepts. Ideas that honestly touch on everything and hopefully help cut through all the noise and info overload we're all dealing with. Today, we're plunging into the really remarkable world of philosopher Evan Thompson. His work, it offers this incredibly powerful, I think, unique lens for understanding our own minds, how we relate to nature, and the huge challenges humanity is facing right now. This age just brimming with data and these super complex problems. We're hoping to give you some of those genuine aha moments, those flashes of insight that really cut through the overwhelm, give you a fresh perspective. It's about making these sometimes dense philosophical ideas feel tangible, relevant, and frankly, useful for just navigating everyday life. So what's the plan? Where are we headed? Well, first, we'll trace Thompson's really unique background, his upbringing, the influences that shaped his incredibly interdisciplinary way of thinking. You'll see why his viewpoint is so different. Then we'll unpack his big ideas on cognition, what thinking even is pushing us way beyond just thinking about the brain in isolation. We'll tackle what he calls the blind spot in scientific thinking. It's like this hidden assumption that might be, distorting how we see reality. And finally, we'll explore how his insights can actually guide us, how we can cultivate wisdom in this world of just growing complexity, everything from climate change to, AI. Expect some surprising facts, definitely some fresh perspectives, and hopefully a new way to understand yourself and the world. Okay, let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And to really grasp the full scope of Evan Thompson's work, his contributions, you really do need to start with the ground he grew out of. His personal history isn't just like background color. It's fundamental. It really shaped his whole approach, why he connects so many different fields: philosophy, cognitive science, Buddhism, biology.
Right, it's not just incidental biographical detail.
Exactly. And central to this, absolutely pivotal, was something called the Lindisfarne Association. Now, this was this experimental institute, kind of a community too, founded by his father, William Irwin Thompson, back in the 1970s. See, his father was a professor, but he felt like traditional universities, well, they weren't really creating the kind of knowledge society truly needed back then. The big interconnected questions.
So he built something different, an alternative.
Precisely. Lindisfarne wasn't just, another think tank. It was this vibrant, living experiment in ideas. Integrated thinking was the goal.
Yeah.
Just try to picture it for a second. Imagine being a kid, like Evan Thompson was, growing up in this place. It was this incredible melting pot. You had contemplative teachers, spiritual leaders from different traditions, cutting-edge scientists, philosophers, poets, artists, ecologists, political activists, all mixing, living together, talking, debating.
Wow, that sounds intense, like a constant seminar.
It was constant dialogue, sometimes, vigorous debate, but always this effort to bridge science and contemplative spirituality. That was the air he breathed from age 10 to 16. So growing up in that kind of environment, so open-minded, intellectually adventurous, it just naturally fosters this holistic view, right? Seeing the connections, which is why his work, and kind of what we're trying to do here too, can make these really complex topics feel accessible. It comes from actually experiencing that interconnectedness firsthand, that deep curiosity.
It makes total sense. It explains that ability to synthesize so much. So who are some of the key figures there? Did specific connections from Lindisfarne really shape his path?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most critical connections, maybe the most critical, was with the neuroscientist Francisco Varela. Varela was a real pioneer. He was doing this radical thing back then, trying to bridge Buddhist philosophy, specifically Buddhist psychology, with Western cognitive science.
That was pretty out there in the 70s and 80s.
Totally. Thompson first met him in '77 at a conference his father co-organized with Gregory Bateson, another huge influence, Bateson, on systems thinking. And then, remarkably, Varela actually came to live with the Thompson family at Lindisfarne. So he wasn't just a colleague. He became this close family friend from Evan's early teens.
Wow. So it was personal, not just intellectual.
Deeply personal. And that bond fueled their intellectual synergy. It led directly to their landmark book, The Embodied Mind, which came out in 1991. Thompson co-authored it with Varela and Eleanor Roche. And that book, it wasn't just a book. It basically became the foundational text for the whole embodied cognition movement. It was this groundbreaking integration, really influential.
And that came directly out of their time together.
Yeah, the partnership really solidified when Thompson, who was a grad student in '86, went to Paris to work with Varela as a research assistant. That intense period together directly led to writing the book, They were living and breathing these ideas together.
So his formal education then, did it follow that same kind of integrated path?
It really did. He started off formally in Asian studies at Amherst College. He dove deep into Chinese language, history, Buddhist philosophy, studying under Robert Thurman, who's a major figure in Buddhist studies.
Okay, so the Eastern philosophy side was foundational.
Definitely. But then he did his PhD in philosophy, focusing specifically on cognitive science, and interestingly, the philosophy of color perception. So you see that blend right there, the scientific rigor meeting deep philosophical questions about experience.
And does he just think about these things, or is there a practice element too? You mentioned Lindisfarne's mix.
Oh, absolutely crucial. This isn't just armchair philosophy for him. He has a dedicated daily sitting meditation practice, something he's done for decades. And maybe even more uniquely, he's been involved in Chinese martial arts and energy work like Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong since he was a kid at Lindisfarne.
So his understanding of the mind and body isn't just theoretical.
Not at all. It's deeply informed by lived experience, by the direct felt sense of being embodied, of being engaged in these practices. And this fosters something he talks about, cognitive humility, really understanding the limits of your own knowledge, that your perspective is always partial, and also a capacity to tolerate uncertainty.
Which seems increasingly vital these days.
Totally. It's not about being unsure. It's about holding space for complexity, for not needing everything neatly boxed up. It allows for real learning, not just sticking to what you already think. And just to complete the picture, he's also been deeply involved since 2003 with the Mind and Life Institute dialogues with the Dalai Lama.
Right, those high-level dialogues between scientists and contemplatives.
Exactly. His participation there just further cements his role right at that intersection, constantly pushing the boundaries of how we understand the mind from these integrated viewpoints. He bridges worlds few others can.
That background is just fascinating. It really sets the stage perfectly for his core ideas. It feels like he was almost destined to challenge conventional thinking. So let's shift gears now and dive into that core philosophical contribution, the embodied and enactive approach to cognition. This really gets to the heart of challenging where we think thinking happens.
Yeah, because the standard view, the one we often just absorb, is that the mind is what's in the head, right? It's what the brain does. But Thompson throws a wrench in that. He argues pretty forcefully that just looking at brain activity isn't enough. It doesn't give you the full picture of a system's cognitive properties. Think about that. Your brain's obviously essential, incredibly complex, but he's saying it's not the whole story of your mind you're thinking. It's like focusing only on the engine and ignoring the car, the driver, the road.
Precisely. He argues we need a better unit of analysis, a more complete picture.
Yeah.
And he calls this the enculturated body-world system. What that means is cognition isn't just some isolated thing happening inside your skull. It's deeply, fundamentally intertwined with your entire physical body, how you move, how you sense your actions, and the specific cultural and environmental world you live in.
So the mind isn't just in you, it's spread out in a way, distributed across you and your interactions.
Exactly. It's like the dance isn't just the dancer's internal plan. It's the dancer, the music, the floor, the audience, all interacting to create the experience. Your mind is this dynamic interplay.
Okay, so how does this differ from older ideas in cognitive science, like the brain as computer model?
Right, that's a key departure. For decades, you had models like computationalism mind as symbol processor or connectionism mind as neural network patterns. These often pictured the mind as, well, kind of passive. The brain takes in data from the outside world, processes it, creates internal representations, like a camera taking pictures.
Okay, processing information about the world.
Yes. But Thompson and Varela, they propose something much more active, the enactive approach. The idea here is that the mind has an active and interactive relationship with the body and the environment. Cognition isn't about passively building internal maps of a pre-existing world. It's an enactment. It's a bringing forth of a world of relevance. We don't just perceive the world, we actively create our experienced world through how we act and interact within it. Our actions shape what even becomes meaningful to us.
So it's less about objectively seeing what's out there and more about constructing what matters to me based on how I engage. Can you give a concrete example? That feels a bit abstract still.
Absolutely. A fantastic way to make this concrete is using Jacob von Eeskel's concept of Umwelt. Umwelt basically means the unique self-world or environment world that a specific organism lives in, defined by its particular sensory abilities and ways of acting.
Okay, like the world as experienced by that creature.
Precisely. Think about us humans. Our perception is heavily dominated by sight, right? We navigate mostly by what we see. Now, contrast that with a dog. A dog's Umwelt its experienced world, is overwhelmingly dominated by smell. Their nose is their primary tool for engaging with the environment, creating a totally different reality.
So the same park is a different world for me and my dog.
Exactly. You might notice the colors, the layout, maybe people playing frisbee. The dog is immersed in this incredibly rich tapestry of smells. Who was here before, where the squirrels went, what other dogs left messages. What's relevant, what's even perceivable in the dog's world, is vastly different from ours, because its body, its senses, its way of interacting, enacts a different world. This totally shifts how we think about knowing or perceiving. It underlies that our knowledge is always perspectival. It's always shaped by our specific embodied being, how we actively engage. It's not some neutral window onto objective reality.
That example makes it really clear. We're not passive observers, we're active participants constructing our experienced reality. So if a dog's world is enacted differently, how far back does this go? Does this sense-making apply even below complex animals?
It does. And this leads to another really profound idea in Thompson's work, the deep continuity between life and mind. He argues, along with thinkers like Antonio Damasio, that mind isn't something that just pops into existence with complex brains. Its roots go way, way back to the very origin of life itself.
Wow, so cognition isn't just for brains.
And not in its most fundamental sense. He talks about autonomous systems that actively create a self through interactions with its environment. They're not passive, they're constantly working to maintain themselves. And then he focuses on a specific type called autopoiesis, which means self-producing and self-regulating. The classic example is a living cell.
Okay, like a single-celled organism.
Exactly. Think about a bacterium. It's not just sitting there. It's constantly rebuilding itself, taking in nutrients, expelling waste, maintaining its boundary, its cell wall, all to keep itself going. That active self-creation and self-maintenance is autopoiesis. And Thompson suggests that even at this basic cellular level, you see the emergence of a sense-making individual. End quote. This is a being for whom certain things in its environment are significant, they matter, and others don't. That bacterium moves towards nutrients, it avoids toxins. Those environmental events have meaning for the cell in relation to its goal of staying alive.
So even a cell has a basic form of perspective, of relevance.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
This inherent sense-making, this rudimentary preference and avoidance, is seen as a critical precursor for subjectivity, for the feeling of having a world that matters to you. This view sees living organisms as having inherent agency. They're not just complex machines reacting passively. They actively seek to alter their conditions in order to keep themselves going.
Moving beyond a purely mechanistic view of life.
Right. It suggests an internal directedness, even at the simplest levels. And this is crucial for understanding why Thompson argues mind can't just be reduced to computation like early AI researchers thought. A computer executes algorithms, but it doesn't care about its own existence. It doesn't actively strive to maintain itself in the face of disruption like a cell does. This agency, this self-concern, is what sets life, and ultimately mind, apart. Consciousness isn't an add-on. It's deeply continuous with the process of being alive.
That reframes life itself, seeing agency right down to the cell. But it also leads us, doesn't it, to what Thompson calls the blind spot, this pervasive issue in how we tend to think, especially scientifically. It sounds like a critical flaw we often overlook.
Yeah, let's unpack that metaphor because it's central to his recent work. Think about the literal blind spot in your eye, where the optic nerve connects.
Right, there are no photoreceptor cells there. Exactly, so you're literally blind in that tiny spot. But the weird thing is, you almost never notice it, right? You don't see that you don't see it. Your brain just cleverly fills in the gap based on the surroundings.
Unless you do those specific eye tests to reveal it.
Right. So Thompson takes this physical blind spot and uses it as a metaphor for science and our whole worldview. He says the scientific blind spot is something fundamental to how science works, but that our scientific worldview has occluded, has hidden. It's the very source of science, our lived experience, that gets forgotten or hidden by the scientific models themselves.
So it's not that science is wrong, but that our understanding of what science delivers can be flawed. We forget where the knowledge came from.
Precisely. We forget that the very experience that motivates science, the ground we stand on, can become invisible within the scientific picture we create.
And the core issue, Thompson argues, is this surreptitious substitution. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is key. It's when we mistake the idealized abstract models we create for the concrete reality of nature itself. We take the tool, the measurement, the equation, the model, and we confuse it with the actual phenomenon it's supposed to represent.
Like confusing the map for the territory.
Exactly. And the surreptitious part means it often happens sneakily, unconsciously. We just slide into thinking the model is the reality without even realizing we've made that leap.
Can you give an example of this substitution in action?
Yeah, his parable of temperature is perfect here. We start with the direct felt experience. Hot, cold, you feel the sun's warmth, the chill of ice, that's primary. Then we invent tools, thermometers to measure this, abstracting the feeling into numbers, scales like Celsius or Fahrenheit. The blind spot happens when we start thinking that temperature is just what the thermometer measures, or is just average kinetic energy, and we forget the primacy of the felt experience that motivated the measurement in the first place.
Right, we forget the hotness or coldness itself.
We forget that the tool is a proxy, an abstraction, not the full, lived reality. We substitute the measurement for the experience.
That's a really clear example. So how does this play out in, say, neuroscience when studying something like consciousness? Does the same substitution happen?
He argues it absolutely does. The blind spot appears when neuroscientists define consciousness only in terms of, say, neuronal computations or integrated information. In doing that, they risk undercutting the source of the model, which is the lived experience itself. Thompson really emphasizes the epistemological primacy of lived experience. Our subjective awareness is the starting point for all knowledge, including scientific knowledge about the brain.
You can't study consciousness without being conscious.
Exactly. If you reduce consciousness just to brain states or information processing, you lose the very phenomenon you set out to explain the subjective quality, the feeling of what it's like. It's like studying the physics of paint and claiming the beauty of the painting isn't real. And this connects directly to philosopher Alfred North Whitehead's ideas, his critique of the fallacy of misplaced concreteness and the bifurcation of nature.
Bifurcation, like splitting nature in two.
Yeah. Whitehead argued that modern science introduced this artificial cut into nature. On one side, you have the objective stuff, mass, charge, location considered really real. On the other, you have the subjective stuff, colors, sounds, feelings, values, considered just in the mind. Less real, maybe even illusory.
Okay, like the classic example of color.
Right. Science explains color in terms of wavelengths of light hitting the retina, processed by the brain. Then the common move is to say, so colors aren't really out there. They're just created by our brains. Thompson pushes back hard on this. He says this view completely fails to account for color as a genuine phenomenon within nature, experienced not just by us, but by other species, often more richly than us. Think of birds seeing ultraviolet or fish in a coral reef.
So saying color isn't real denies the experienced reality of much of the natural world, including our own.
Precisely. It sets up this metaphysical hierarchy that devalues lived experience, effectively cutting ourselves out from what nature is fundamentally. We end up alienated from our own reality.
It sounds like this bifurcation creates a real knot, especially when science tries to study the mind itself. How do we study this subject objectively?
That's exactly the paradox of subjectivity Thompson highlights. The subject, the experiencer, the knower, is both the condition for anything to be known, or the one doing the knowing, and something that can itself be studied scientifically, like studying the brain basis of experience. It's a tangled up knot, as he says. How can the observer also be the observed without reducing one to the other or creating an infinite regress?
Like trying to see your own eyeball directly.
Kind of. And this paradox, he argues, fuels these deeply ingrained dichotomous modes of thought in our culture. Mind versus body, subject versus object, inside versus outside, subjective versus objective. We feel forced to pick a side. Thompson says the challenge is to move beyond these dualisms towards frameworks that emphasize irreducible relationality and irreducible complexity.
Irreducible relationality, meaning things are fundamentally connected. You can't break them apart into separate boxes.
Exactly. Mind and body aren't two things, but two aspects of one process. Subject and object co-arise in the act of knowing. In these richer frameworks, we, the investigators, are always part of the system we're studying. We're nodes in the network, not detached observers looking in from outside.
So is he anti-science then? Is this a critique of science?
No, not at all. He's very clear about this. He's absolutely committed to science. His critique, especially in his book, The Blind Spot, is aimed at a particular philosophy, a set of often unexamined assumptions that has gotten grafted onto or embedded within science. He's looking for a balance, a way to do science while remembering the much bigger, more complicated enmeshed network we're part of, instead of oversimplifying it. Recognizing this blind spot, he argues, is vital for clearer thinking, for intellectual humility, and for avoiding these distortions. In our age of information overload, seeing these hidden assumptions is maybe the first step towards genuine understanding, towards being truly well-informed. It lets us ask better questions.
That blind spot concept is powerful, especially thinking about information overload and how easily models become reality for us. It really makes you question the foundations of how we're approaching massive, complex issues, like the climate crisis. This seems like a perfect transition to the societal implications of his ideas. How does this blind spot affect how we tackle global challenges?
It connects directly. Thompson frames the climate crisis first as a planetary crisis for humanity. He makes a careful distinction here. It's not a crisis for the planet as such, he says. The planet, life itself, will likely continue in some form. It's a crisis for us, for human civilization, and for countless other species we share the Earth with.
Okay, it's a crisis within the planetary system, affecting us profoundly.
Right. And he argues the root cause isn't just emissions or policy failures. Fundamentally, it's a cultural crisis, specifically a crisis of meaning.
Yeah.
This crisis, he links back to that particular worldview that philosophy grafted onto science since the scientific revolution and industrial age, the one that creates the blind spot, the bifurcation of nature.
So our way of thinking, our worldview, is part of the problem.
He argues it is. He critiques what he calls crisis epistemology. This is a way of thinking that defaults to linear logic, demands certainty before acting, and tries to control complex systems as if they were simple machines. Thompson says this approach is part of the problem, not the solution. Why? Because it fundamentally distorts complexity. It tends to violate ethical bonds by treating nature or people as mere resources, and ultimately it's generally unwise.
Can you unpack that a bit more? How does crisis epistemology violate ethical bonds?
Well, think about it. If your primary approach is instrumental control, how do we fix this problem? How do we manage these variables? You can easily lose sight of the intrinsic value of the things you're trying to manage. Ecosystems, species, even communities become just inputs or outputs in a calculation, rather than interconnected parts of a living whole with their own agency and right to exist. It fosters detachment, not relationship. It's a very narrow focus that can justify actions that harm the larger system or violate deeper ethical connections.
I see. It prioritizes a certain kind of problem-solving over relational understanding.
Exactly. And this echoes thinkers like Gregory Bateson, who, remember, was a big influence on Varela. Bateson was warning decades ago, back in the 60s and 70s, that we needed a different kind of thinking to deal with complex, unpredictable systems, like ecosystems. He was incredibly ahead of his time. He was the first scientist, apparently in 1967, to publicly warn about a potential greenhouse effect leading to runaway climate change.
Wow, 1967.
Yeah, and Bateson talked about human conscious purpose, how our intentional focus on achieving a specific goal always makes us selectively aware. We focus on the goal and ignore everything else that doesn't seem immediately relevant. This selective awareness, Bateson argued, is inherently exclusionary and leads directly to the blind spot. We try to fix one part of the system, but because we ignored the wider connections, we end up creating unintended, often worse, problems elsewhere.
The classic example of unintended consequences. Okay, so if crisis epistemology is flawed, what's the alternative Thompson suggests?
He advocates for what scholar Kyle White calls coordination epistemologies. Instead of organizing knowledge primarily around control or objective facts detached from context, these approaches organize knowledge through the vector of kinship relationships.
Kinship, like family.
It includes that, but it's much broader. Thompson emphasizes that kinship here means recognizing and honoring ethical bonds, bonds to the more than human world, to the biosphere, to other species, to the land, to future generations.
So it's about seeing ourselves in relationship with the world, not separate from it, an ethical stance woven into how we know.
Precisely. It moves from detached observation to engaged, ethical participation. It's about recognizing our deep entanglement and responsibility within the web of life. And he connects this directly to the concepts from enactive cognitive science. We talked about ideas like emergence, participatory sense-making, and cognitive ecologies. These scientific ideas, he argues, provide scientific materials for cultivating systemic wisdom. They help us understand how interconnected systems work, how meaning arises through interaction, and how our own actions shape the reality we experience. It's about knowing how to be wisely within a complex system, not just knowing about it.
And this connects back to the blind spot idea in another way too, right? Regarding education.
Yes, he sees the stark divide we often create between STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts and humanities as another manifestation of this blindness.
Yeah.
He uses this great ecological analogy. He says overemphasizing STEM while cutting or devaluing the arts and humanities is like drastically reducing species diversity in an ecosystem.
Making it less resilient, more vulnerable.
Exactly. A healthy ecosystem needs diversity. Similarly, a healthy culture needs the critical thinking, the ethical reflection, the historical perspective, the creativity fostered by the humanities alongside the technical skills of STEM. He argues this disciplinary reduction actually undermines the culture that creates innovation, that creates scientific advance casing. Real breakthroughs often come from cross-pollination, from asking deeper questions about meaning and purpose, which are the domain of the humanities.
So ignoring the humanities is like creating an intellectual monoculture, which is ultimately weaker.
That's the argument. What this whole section shows, I think, is how Thompson's ideas are incredibly practical, recognizing the blind spot, fostering relational ways of knowing. This isn't just academic theory. It's vital for our collective ability to navigate the crises we face. It's about shifting from seeking quick fixes to cultivating genuine systemic wisdom and a deeper sense of connection and responsibility. That feels relevant to everyone.
Absolutely. It's a call to change not just what we know, but how we know and how we relate. Which brings us perfectly to Thompson's work on consciousness itself, the nature of the self, and how these big philosophical ideas connect to tangible practices like meditation or even lucid dreaming. This is where the philosophy really meets lived experience.
It really is. And when it comes to the self, Thompson offers this very elegant middle way. He steers clear of two common extremes. On one side, you have the idea of a fixed, unchanging soul or essence, this permanent I that exists underneath all experience.
The traditional soul idea, maybe.
Right. On the other extreme, you sometimes find the idea, maybe in some interpretations of Buddhism or certain philosophies, that the self is purely an illusion, that there's actually nothing there, no you at all.
Okay, so either a solid thing or absolutely nothing.
Thompson finds both of those too rigid. Instead, he argues the self is not a thing or an entity, it's a process. And crucially, it's under constant construction. This is his enacted view of the self. It gets enacted in and through the body, including the brain's relationship to the world and especially other beings.
So my sense of self isn't fixed. It's something I'm constantly creating through my interactions, my roles, my body.
Exactly. Think about how your self feels different when you're with family versus colleagues, or how it changes over time based on your experiences and memories. It's not a static statue, it's a dynamic, flowing process. But importantly, this processual self isn't nothing. It has vital functions. It allows for autobiographical memory, weaving a story of your life. It lets you project yourself into the future, planning, hoping, worrying. Impairing these self-related functions, like in certain neurological conditions, clearly diminishes a person's existence. So the self process is functionally real and important.
That feels much more fluid and frankly realistic, and potentially helpful for things like getting stuck in negative self-views.
Potentially, yes. If the self is a process, not a fixed thing, then negative self-concepts, I am a failure, can be seen as patterns within that process, patterns that can potentially be changed or reenacted differently. It offers a sense of agency rather than being trapped by a fixed identity. And this view connects to his own deep interest in how consciousness changes, particularly across the sleep-wake cycle. He's been fascinated by dreams since childhood.
Dreams as another window into the self-process.
You could say that. He notes dreaming is sort of an expected outcome of having such a complex, constantly active brain. And he discusses how we experience dreams and also memories. There are two main perspectives. The field perspective, where you're immersed, seeing through your own eyes in the dream.
Right, like you're in it.
And then the observer perspective, where you see yourself in the dream, as if from the outside, maybe looking down on the scene.
Okay, like watching yourself in a movie.
Exactly. And interestingly, he links developing this observer perspective in memory and dreams to our social development. As we grow, we learn to see ourselves as others see us. We internalize that external viewpoint. This ability to mentally step outside ourselves seems connected to maturing social cognition.
That's a fascinating link between inner experience and social learning. So if we can have this observer view naturally, can we cultivate it intentionally? What about lucid dreaming? That sounds pretty exotic.
It does. But Thompson treats it seriously as a state of consciousness worth investigating. Lucid dreaming is simply realizing you're dreaming while you're in the dream state.
Okay, becoming aware within the dream.
Right. And what's amazing is how Tibetan Buddhist traditions, for example, have long used this state in practices like dream yoga. It's not just for kicks, it's a profound meditative practice. They use it to work directly with emotions, like transforming fear or anger that arises in the dream into compassion or loving kindness, and also to gain insight into the plasticity of the mind, how malleable our reality construction really is. If you can change the dream world, it highlights how much your waking world is also constructed.
So it's a training ground for understanding the nature of mind.
In a way, yes. Thompson shares this great anecdote from Alan Wallace, a prominent Buddhist scholar practitioner. Thompson tried meditating while lucid dreaming, just sitting still like in waking meditation.
And
The dream fell apart. He lost lucidity. Wallace told him that in a lucid dream, you often need to keep generating dream content, keep interacting, maybe fly or explore, rather than becoming completely passive to maintain the lucid state. It highlights the active, enacted nature of even this state of consciousness.
interesting. So what about mindfulness then? It's such a buzzword now. How does Thompson approach it?
He cuts through the hype to get at its core. He defines mindfulness as cultivating meta-awareness. That means being aware of your experience as it happens, rather than just being lost in it. This allows for decentering and de-identification. That's key. You notice a thought like, I'm not successful, but instead of automatically buying into it and feeling bad, you can step back and see it as, oh, there's the I'm not successful thought.
Creating space between you and the thought.
Exactly. You see it as just a mental event passing through, not your fundamental identity. It gives you this larger space to observe your mind without getting swept away. That offers huge psychological freedom. But crucially, Thompson stresses mindfulness is embodied understanding, not just some detached mental trick happening solely inside your head. He critiques the neurocentric tendency to reduce mindfulness just to specific patterns of brain activation. He thinks that's a conceptual mistake, ignoring the body in context.
Right, back to the embodied mind idea.
Yes. He argues the benefits are inseparable from the social and communal settings of the practice. Even meditating alone is still a form of ritual. You're adopting postures, following instructions, engaging in a culturally learned practice. This broadens our view of well-being. It suggests that community, shared understanding, and the ritualistic aspects are vital parts of why these practices can be transformative. It's not just about changing your brainwaves in isolation.
That's a much richer picture than just brain training. Now, he also wrote a book called Why I Am Not a Buddhist, which sounds provocative. What's his stance there?
Yeah, it's a nuanced critique. He's pushing back against what he calls Buddhist exceptionalism. This is the modern idea you sometimes hear, that Buddhism is somehow unique, perfectly compatible with science, because it's not really a religion, it's a mind science or therapy.
Okay, stripping away the religious aspects.
Right. Thompson argues this Buddhist modernism flattens Buddhism, ignores its rich history, its cosmology, its devotional elements, and misunderstands what religion is as a complex human cultural phenomenon. He's arguing for respecting Buddhism as a religion in its fullness.
So what can science study then, in his view, regarding Buddhism or meditation?
Science can definitely study the effects of Buddhist practices on the brain, on behavior, on well-being, just like it can study the effects of prayer, yoga, or any other human practice. But, he argues, science cannot settle the deep metaphysical disputes, like whether there's ultimately a self or not, nor can it dictate ethical or normative truths. Those questions belong to philosophy and the contemplative traditions themselves. Science has limits.
Okay, respecting different domains of knowledge.
Exactly. And finally, he reminds us of the original goal of philosophy in many ancient traditions, Greek, Buddhist, Chinese. It wasn't just about abstract arguments. Philosophy or knowledge in general was about cultivating a whole being of character and attitude and way of life. It involves spiritual exercises, practices aimed at transformation, something largely lost in modern academic philosophy. Philosophy, in this broader sense, offers a critical check on our assumptions, fosters that crucial cognitive humility, and helps us tolerate uncertainty. These are vital skills, not just academic virtues. So this section really shows how Thompson integrates everything mind, body, self, practice towards a path of deeper understanding and wisdom, offering real tools for personal growth and navigating complexity. It's like becoming a more whole person.
That integration of practice and philosophy feels incredibly relevant, especially as we face these huge technological shifts. Which brings us to the final section. Thompson's take on AI, technology, and our future, viewed through that critical lens of the blind spot. How does his framework help us understand the rise of AI?
He offers a really important, maybe sobering perspective. First off, he cuts through a lot of the hype. He asserts that fears about AI suddenly becoming conscious or sentient are basically hype.
Okay, so he's skeptical about conscious machines.
Very. He defines today's powerful deep learning systems, like the large language models everyone's talking about, as incredibly powerful statistical prediction tools. They are amazing at finding patterns, correlations in massive data sets, and predicting what comes next, the next word, the next pixel. That's why they can seem so convincingly human-like.
But it's pattern matching, not understanding.
That's his core point. He argues AI knows nothing about words, nothing about meaning, and fundamentally doesn't care about anything. It lacks any access to relevance or semantics in the way a living embodied creature does. So his striking phrase is, it has no lights at all. It's mimicking intelligence, not possessing it.
And the blind spot comes in how we interpret this mimicry.
Exactly. The blind spot of AI is how it covertly replaces genuine embodied intelligence with computation. We start treating these abstract computational models as if they were real agents, projecting consciousness onto sophisticated pattern matching. Plus, AI suffers from a deep amnesia of experience. We forget that all the data it's trained on is human-generated, saturated with our experiences, our biases, our assumptions. The AI reflects these back to us, but it has no lived understanding of them itself.
It's an echo of us, but without the source experience.
Precisely. And this leads to what he calls a weird collapse between humans and machines, which he sees as dangerous. We externalize aspects of human language into these computational forms, grammar, patterns, statistics. But then, crucially, we forget that they were abstracted out of a context that involves people in the world with cares, with bodies, who can act on the world.
We forget the embodied, meaningful context of real language.
Yes. And the risk is that we then start degrading our life worlds to allow the machines to navigate more efficiently. Human interactions become simplified, flattened, increasingly being degraded to suit the capabilities of these machines.
Like talking to chatbots instead of people, or tailoring our writing for algorithms.
Those could be examples. The deeper danger is we start giving our authority over to that technology since it can see it better than us. It processes data faster, finds patterns we miss. We forget that its seeing was set in motion by our orientation, by the human goals and biases embedded in its creation. We risk valuing computational efficiency over embodied wisdom and genuine human connection.
And this ties back to the STEM humanities issue again.
Directly. That overemphasis on technical skills without the balancing perspectives from arts, ethics, history, it undermines the culture that creates innovation in the first place. Like reducing biodiversity makes an ecosystem fragile. The ultimate challenge, Thompson urges, is to find some kind of balance. We need to remember there's a much bigger, more complicated enmeshed network in which we are placed. If we just push the computational, abstract way of thinking, especially amplified by powerful technology, without that balance, without remembering our embodied, interconnected reality, he warns quite starkly, we will destroy our own habitat.
And not just the physical environment, but our social and cultural habitat, too.
Exactly, our life worlds. And this connects to his view on suffering. He suggests that life and suffering are intertwined. If you're going to build a universe with life, you're going to build a universe with suffering. And for him, crucially, the capacity to suffer is the criterion of moral standing. AI cannot suffer. It lacks this fundamental basis for morality. Our current path, if we ignore these blind spots, risks creating immense suffering for humans, for other species driven by technologies that lack wisdom, compassion, or any genuine understanding of the consequences. It's a powerful call for critical reflection and prioritizing embodied understanding over purely computational power.
A very critical perspective indeed, urging us towards wisdom, not just cleverness.
Absolutely. So just to kind of wrap up our deep dive today, we've really journeyed through the rich landscape of Evan Thompson's thought. We started with his unique background, Lindisfarne Varela, showing how his personal path shaped his integrated approach. Then we explored his core idea, the embodied enactive mind cognition not just in the brain, but arising from the whole enculturated body-world system, actively bringing forth a world of meaning. Think of the Umwelt example. We confronted the crucial concept of the blind spot, that hidden substitution of models for reality, the bifurcation of nature, and how this impacts everything from science to how we face global crises like climate change, leading us towards coordination epistemologies rooted in kinship. And we delved into consciousness, the self as a dynamic process, not a fixed thing, and the real value of contemplative practices like lucid dreaming and mindfulness, understood as embodied social phenomena, not just brain states. Plus his nuanced take on Buddhism and science. At the end of the day, Thompson's work consistently pushes us beyond those simple dichotomies, mind-body, subject-object. It urges us towards embracing irreducible relationality, complexity, and cultivating a systemic wisdom that truly respects how interconnected everything is. Understanding these ideas hopefully gives you, the listener, a clearer lens on information overload, maybe a richer, more flexible sense of your own self, and a more ethically aware way to engage with the world, especially as technology races forward.
Evan Thompson's work really leaves us with this powerful thought. Maybe the future of humanity doesn't just hinge on solving problems with more data or smarter tech. Maybe it hinges, more fundamentally, on transforming how we think about ourselves, about knowledge, and about our intricate, undeniable place within the living, suffering, interconnected web of nature. So here's something to maybe mull over. What does it truly mean to be well-informed if our very ways of knowing, our epistemologies, carry these hidden blind spots that constantly shape and maybe limit what we can even perceive? We really encourage you to continue your own deep dive. Maybe just start by noticing your own mind's blind spots in daily life, those taken for granted assumptions. Or pay attention to how your physical interaction with the world, your embodiment, shapes your perception, your personal and Umwelt. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today, and thank you always for your curiosity.